as we stayed there longer, we started learning how you can really kind of dive in and feel like you are part of their team.
Hello, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today we have Erica Ryan's special topic episode all about extended hospital stays. But first, we have a new question of the month. It is, what is the hardest aspect of your child's medical issues/diagnosis? So one more time. What is the hardest aspect of your child's medical issues or diagnosis? This might be a tough one to put a finger on for those of us who have several hard aspects of our child's diagnosis, but I would love to hear about that and why. So head to the website, therarelifepodcast.com, to answer this question. And if you follow me on Instagram, I'll also give you a chance to answer that at the end of the month. Okay, so as we mentioned in the previous episode, Erica and her husband Shaun co-wrote the Extended Stay Notebook to help guide you through your unexpected hospital journey, as it claims on the cover. It is a tool that every parent facing hospitalizations needs, which I'm guessing many of us listening today. Erica and Shaun thought of everything, and I really think it's incredible that they created this. In this episode, Erica and I chat about her inspiration for the notebook, why she created it, how you can get your hands on one, as well as her top 3 tips for hospitalizations, a lot of which is applicable to medical parenting in general too. All right, let's dig in. Hi, Erica. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Yes. So we get to talk about your huge long hospital stay and really what you've learned from it. I guess we talked about it in the previous episode, but we get to talk about what you learned from it and what other parents can glean. And, I've told you this before, but about 9 months ago when you reached out to me and sent me a copy of your extended hospital stay notebook, I was so impressed with this beautiful product that you made through your pain and through, this really hard thing. I think that's really awesome that you felt inspired to help other parents going through similar things. And I would love for you to share, your inspiration behind the notebook and a little overview of it so people kind of know what it's about and what it is.
Yeah. So my husband and I, we had a very long hospital stay, 455 days with our son Westley, consecutive days, and he's had a total of 526 days in hospital
Mm.
in his 3 years in life. And when we first got abruptly introduced to hospital life, we had just a blank notebook in our car for Boy Scouts that we grabbed out because we were like, okay, we need something to write down all of this information coming to us. And so we started just keeping this little notebook of when people would stop in and jotting things down.
Mm.
But what we were finding throughout our journey is that so many times the hangups and the issues that would arise were because we didn't know the right questions to ask when the
Mm.
physician was there in the room at that 5-minute increment that you got him for that
Yeah.
day. And they would leave and you didn't really know, well, what just happened? And what does this mean? And then you have these list of questions to ask. And then it's, a whole day before you get to talk to them again, or you have to relay messages.
Yeah.
And we were finding that not only was that delaying care that was happening, but that we didn't feel very empowered to know what one should be asking, but that the decisions that we were making were even right.
Yeah.
Because there's so many complexities and because everything works together, it's like they walk in, they want to talk to you about a diagnosis, and then they want to talk to you about treatment, then they want to talk to you about all these other things that they suggest, and then some medications, and then they leave.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the whole process, we learned very quickly, okay, well, what are the questions that we need to ask when they walk in? And it became a running joke during rounds because the doctors knew the questions my husband would ask and I would ask. So depending on who was there that day, they would go through their rounds. We would then ask our questions, and then my husband would take a snapshot of it, or I would take a snapshot of it, and we would send it to the other person. And then if there were any other follow-up questions, we would write them down and then convey them back, which is
Mm.
a terrible system. Um, but we didn't know any better. But as we stayed there longer, we started learning a lot of things that, one, make a hospital stay a little bit easier on the parents,
Mhm.
but will also make a very big difference for how you can communicate effectively with providers, how you can speak up and speak clearly, even with no prior knowledge, and really kind of dive in and feel like you are part of their team. You're not this person just
Yes.
listening into rounds, you're an active participant, being able to ask the right questions and get your answers as quickly and as thoroughly as possible so that you can move on. And you
Mm.
don't get that in the hospital. You stand up there, you listen to rounds, and half the words you don't understand what they mean.
Mhm.
Half the people in rounds, you don't know why they're there. And they leave, and then you start thinking about them and you don't know what to do with that information next.
Yeah.
And if you've listened to the previous episode, you knew that I had said there was this feeling that I would be able to use everything that we went through for some reason. I knew
Mhm.
that there was a reason. And one of the gifts that God has bestowed on me is organization.
Mm.
While it drives my husband crazy, and it's been a point of contention before because of how much I like my lists and how much I like to organize and organize the list. So
I
I make
love
the
that.
list and then I organize the list. Um, I realized that that was the perfect gift that I had to be able to give to someone else, to be able to organize and give them the tools. So when they're presented with this incredibly emotional, overwhelming time, that you're being thrown into something that, one, you never expected to happen, and you're processing all at the same time, but being able to give someone a tangible strategic plan to what they can expect and
Mm.
how they can be effective in managing the hospital stay so they feel in control and they can communicate clearly, has been a gift back to me, because
Mm.
now I can help other people not feel that panic, and that, am I doing the right things and am I thinking about everything together? So
Mhm.
from rounds, from daily sheets to rounds where you can track all of the information about, labs and the specialties and what the plan is for the day, list all your questions and
Mhm.
what is your child's mood that day, because those are things most people don't track. They
Yeah.
have their data points and they skip over the things that parents notice. Being able to clearly understand what the plan is, what the goal is, and actually have everyone on the same page of, here is our goal, because
Mhm.
not everybody has the same goal as you.
Yeah.
And making sure they understand what your goal is for that day is very helpful for providers and understanding that care that they're going to provide to your child.
Mhm.
But I remember one of the worst feelings in the world was a physician walked in and they started talking about a diagnosis. And I stopped them and I said, "What are you talking about?" And they were like, "Well, this condition." And I was like, "I've never heard that before." And they're like, "Oh, it's another name for this." And I was like, "Well,
Oh.
that's not helpful to me. So now you're going to have
Yeah.
to say everything that you said to me before again."
Yeah.
um, because I didn't know. And so
Yeah.
being able to articulate, okay, well, what is a diagnosis? What are all the other names for that? What does this mean for outcome of life? Things that you want to know, because the thing I struggled with in the hospital the most was, I needed to know, okay, if this doesn't work, what's next? Like I
Mhm.
wanted to know that there was plan B,
Yeah,
that not
yeah.
everything was riding on what we're currently doing. Because if all of a sudden I see it's not working, I'm then in a panic because I
Mhm.
don't know if there is another option
Yeah.
or what that even looks like. So,
Mhm.
really walking a parent through that and
Mhm.
saying, here are all the right questions when you get handed a new diagnosis,
Yeah.
to calm those fears. Same for medications.
Mm.
They come in with a medication and want to tell you about it, and they don't go through, well, what are the side effects? What are the other options? What is this commonly known as? Or the best thing that I will say actually just recently happened before he passed is, the cardiologist came in and they were like, okay, well, now that his leak is getting a little bit worse, we want to try this medication.
Mhm.
And I said, well, we tried that medication before. And they were like, we have? And I was like, yeah, we tried it on this date. And this is what happened after he was on that
Oh,
medication.
wow.
And this was the reason why we stopped it. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's right. Because, yeah, they could look
Oh
back
my
and see that he
gosh.
was on it, but there's no chart of reason why you stopped it. With certain medications in the charts, they can see general information about when
Mm.
you've done a medication, but they can't see like what happened. Like, why did we
Mhm.
stop that medication? Or what did the child show signs of that made us stop it? Because they only
Yeah.
chart if you're allergic.
My goodness,
They don't,
what?
yeah, right. So, like, being able to say, no, no, their heart rate dropped really dangerously low, we cannot try that medication again. Or if we do, there you
Wow.
have to have a completely different plan in place for what that looks like.
And
So being able to just ask those questions and
mm.
know confidently that you're making the right decision.
And you have a section in there, I'll say too, like with the medications.
Yes.
So all these different things that Erica learned to, to write down into notes. I think that's one really cool thing about it is like, I mean, there are, I want to say 12 different tabs,
Yep.
different sections. Okay. That
Yes.
was a lucky guess. So I'm sitting here looking at it. Um, but like she thought of everything. Her and her husband thought of everything. And I think it's just so cool. It's almost like having like a big sister kind of like walking you through all the things that she learned, all the things to be keeping track of. And, I was thinking as I was looking through it too, I was like, this is like, okay, so I don't know if you or the audience have seen those NICU journals. I mean, we had one gifted us when Kimball was in the NICU, and it just has, the very basics like, oh, who was the nurse? And it's more of like from like a baby book, right? It's more of
Hmm.
like, nostalgic and stuff. But then this is like NICU parent, like beefed up. Like we're ready to be lead of this medical team because I feel like there is kind of that transition from the beginning of the NICU to when you're like, oh no, I'm like the head of this medical team and I got this. And I feel like this
Yes.
notebook is very indicative of that. It's like, oh, we grew up, we're in charge now. We will,
Yes.
we'll be keeping track of the stuff you're not keeping track of because we really love our child. And I don't know, I just think it's so cool. I just
Well, that
love
was
it.
funny. When I created it, I looked for things and everything I found was, like my cancer journey, but it was like, how am I feeling today? What is my, like,
Mm-hmm.
everything was a process and there was like an end in sight.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like this, there might not be an end in sight. You might not
Mm-hmm.
know what that looks like or
Mm-hmm.
how you're even going to get there. Or because it's so custom to the person experiencing it in the hospital, if it's not a straight line or if it's not a typical, oh, we're just going in for this and, it's a regular routine procedure and then we'll be out. No, like there are those parents that have been in there for a long time that just don't know when they're leaving. And being able to chart all of this stuff and know for a fact and not have to ask someone else to dig through their charted notes
Mm-hmm.
somewhere where, oh, you remember when we did that?
Mm-hmm.
And why did we do that? No, no, no. You could flip to it right here and you could say, no, we did this. And this was the
Mm-hmm.
reason why we did it. And feel confident in speaking that and being on the same wavelength and
Mm-hmm.
heard by the doctors in the same way.
Yeah, I'm sure that they take you so much more seriously. We can be like, on this exact date, this thing happened with this, dosage instead of like, for some reason, I feel like it didn't go well, but I don't remember what happened, but let's not do it. Like, I'm sure they're going to take you so
Yeah.
much more seriously with like data. And I have to say, okay, really quick too, and then I'd love you to tell us how to get these. I think my favorite part of the whole thing is at the end, the tips for stay. And I just
Yep.
have to say, like, we're gonna talk about more like overarching themes than just like these. These are like very practical tips, but I love these. So, like, a few of my favorites: requesting a certain kind of room that you want, or when they can do rounds. Like, they may not comply, but like knowing that, hey, you can ask for, you can ask for anything. Like, I really love that. And having, okay, I wrote down my little list of like what I loved. Hanging happy, healthy photos of your child around the room so the medical team can be like, oh, this is them at baseline. Like, this is a healthy version of them. Like, that's awesome. And
Hmm.
then asking for volunteers to spend time with your child when you can't be there. I think that's so great. There are lots of these little tips. And I think that that's like one of the most valuable parts of this. I just love that so much. Because again, it's like your big sister Erica's already gone through it and she can walk you through all the things. So how can we get these, big sister Erica?
Yeah, so I do have a website where you can kind of take a look at the sections. I actually do have a video on there that will walk you through each section,
Hmm.
and kind of why I created each section. If you go to strengtheningbyfire.com, that is our website, and I have an Instagram. It's at Strengthening by Fire as well. That has a link in there.
Hmm.
Um, you can purchase them for yourself. You can also purchase them and have them shipped to someone else.
I love
So
that.
it is a very practical way. There was always those times that people were like, well, what can I do for you? And so this is a very practical way to help someone who is in the hospital that I don't want to say that means the most, but you got those people, I want to drop off food, which is very nice. But
Mm.
being able to hand someone like an action plan for this is like how you can feel more in control and how you can impact the child that's actually in the hospital, that's like a weight in gold. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
if I could have been handed one of these notebooks, I would have taken that over any meal train any day, just
Yes.
because it felt like more practical help that I was being given. So
Mm.
you can have them sent to someone. We do also have the option that you can actually purchase one that is donated towards a scholarship that I have,
Mm.
for some people who may not be able to afford it for themselves, because I just cover costs in the price.
Mm.
So really just printing and materials and shipping, they can donate to. And then I do have people request who cannot afford them, and I have them shipped out to them directly, at no
Mm.
cost. So there is an option to sponsor a scholarship. And if you do know someone who cannot afford one, but who has a need, they can also apply online as well.
Oh man, I love that so much because, like you say, I mean, I think one of the reasons it's so valuable, like especially just compared to like, we try to help each other and help people who are going through things like this, but it's really is hard to know how to like directly affect that experience more than just the support of like, meals and childcare and stuff, which is, like you say, is really important. But I think even just going back to like the time when you were able to say, hey, no, this heart and medication would actually be dangerous to put him back on, like you can have that kind of effect on this child in their life. Like, I think that is so cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
awesome. Okay. So let's dig into our three top tips for hospital stays. And I have as our first one to not be afraid to take charge. And I feel like we kind of like, hinted at this, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about taking charge as the parent.
Yeah. So I would say the most important thing that, of course, we had to learn the hard way is making sure that the medical team understands that you are the patient. So, as the
Mm.
parent, because your child cannot make decisions on their own, if you're in this circumstance where your child is not verbal and cannot express things, they must treat you as the patient. So, they must consult you on things, and they must take you seriously when you have an issue. So, don't be afraid to actually say that in rounds. I know
Mm.
it sounds strange, but they need to understand how serious you are on certain items that you don't feel comfortable with. And being able to vocally say, I am the patient because I am in charge of my child.
Mm.
So you need to run things by me and you need to include me in the decisions that you're making on my child's behalf. And that honestly, you are the only consistent person that is
Yeah.
there. You're the only person. Yes, you could have the same nurse 3 days in a row or the same attending a whole entire week in a row. But you, as the parent, are the only one there every day, seeing your child every day. You know your child. And so you have a voice
Mm.
and you need to speak up and be comfortable having those confrontations.
Yeah.
I always used to say, well, you don't get what you want unless you ask for it.
Yeah.
So if you don't like something or something doesn't feel good, always ask again or always ask another opinion, because sometimes the
Mm.
attending would say something and then you would ask the nurse practitioner and be like, I'm not feeling comfortable with this. Do you know of other options? Because the nurses are also there every day and see it
Mm.
firsthand, more like impacts of certain things. And I got a lot of
Interesting.
great tips and advice from nurses.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's such a great hack. Oh my gosh, yes. Because who's like,
Yeah.
I mean, doctors are great and they have, all the training and stuff, but it's like nurses are there. They're there for it. Like they're with the patient way more than the doctors are. I love
I
that.
remember asking because, they can't give you their own opinion. I remember always asking nurses, if you were in this circumstance with your child, would you be making the same decision?
Mm, that's the way to phrase it.
And they were able to then tell me what they would do.
Mm,
And so I
okay.
kind of was able to like skirt it or at least give me more information that might give me a different perspective. Because I
Mm-hmm.
always realized that I could be the emotional mess and I could be wearing my heart on my sleeve when I would get upset about things. And so running it by someone else who isn't the doctor, but that understands it from both a patient care perspective and a parent perspective
Mm-hmm.
was always so helpful.
I love that. That's a great lead into our second point, which is that doctors are human. Shock, right? Like that's kind of this moment of like, I know we were talking about this earlier, but like there's this moment almost like when you become a parent and you're like, wait, like my parents were kind of just winging it too. Like they are very human and they made mistakes. You kind of like realize their humanity once you become them. And I feel like there's that moment in the NICU or shortly after, after you have your child and you're like, wait a minute, like these are people. These are people with degrees that are doing their best, but like, obviously they have flaws too. And I think that's a really important realization.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big realization for us as well, is that until we got into a spot where we were like, I just don't feel so comfortable about that, we realized we could ask second opinions
Mm,
within the hospital system or even outside the hospital system, which we did several times.
mm,
And I was actually quite pleasantly surprised to feel how comfortable even the physicians I was asking the second opinion on what they were telling me, they
mhm.
were completely fine with me getting the second opinion. Or at least the
Oh,
doctors I wanted to work with were
mhm,
very open to second opinion because they knew we are trying to make the best decision that fits our family life
mhm.
and that meets our goals that we have, not the goals established by what a doctor might think, but what is best for our family, our circumstance. And they do have limited capacity.
Yeah.
Um, I remember almost crowdsourcing information um,
Mm,
because in the rare community, as most of the listeners might understand, when you have rare conditions or when you have several complex systems,
mhm.
their scope is only within their system. And
Right.
so they don't know how things present because they're not given those options very often with these rare kids. They don't have cases that are very similar, Down syndrome,
Mhm.
heart condition, short gut. Later, we got CVI diagnosis, endocrine insufficiencies. Like, there are not very many kids who have that. And
Yeah.
me being able to crowdsource other parents whose kids do have that to find those one or two, and then
Mhm.
bringing suggestions back. They're very open to that information. So
Interesting.
I like to say nothing like a mama bear to find the very rare one case study
Mhm.
that then you can present to the physician
Yes.
to get their buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, I've had a moment where I was able to go to, Kimball syndrome, go to, the other parents who have kids with that and be like, "Hey, guys, do they have, vision loss too?" Because it wasn't in the research, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, they totally do." And so I was able to go to, the ophthalmologist and be like, "So this is also, consistent with his syndrome." And they're like, "Whoa, really?" They may roll their eyes a little bit, but I think they appreciate a little bit more of a case study, especially when there's no research, like in your case, with that exact combination or very little research, other parents are a really great resource.
Yeah, and even like we got the diagnosis for CVI through our school,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was never brought up in the hospital. I think because at that time, like all of the other compounding things, it never was on the radar that he couldn't see because they
Yeah.
had ophthalmology come by and they're like, his eyes look healthy. Well, but he had a stroke. His brain isn't talking to his eyes. So
Oh,
once again,
man.
asking the right questions, I probably would have asked that sooner, but I
Mhm.
had no idea. And just being able to get it from they weren't a doctor at our school that diagnosed it. They just said,
Mm.
hey, we noticed this. And sometimes with kids who have had strokes, this is what can happen. And we were like, what?
Yeah, how'd they miss that?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely different perspectives, we've had, different therapists, in-home therapists through early intervention who you just have kind of more trying to think how to phrase this, more of, quality of life in mind than just keeping him alive, and I think that is really helpful in things like CVI where it's like, yeah, well, his lack of vision, it won't likely kill him, but it still is really important. We still need to know
Right.
about that. So, I mean, especially as a parent, I think we're straddling both sides where we want to keep them healthy and safe, but we also really want, their quality of life to be as good as possible. So, I think that's also a superpower of the parent.
Yeah. I feel like in the medical community, my husband and I state this all the time to people is I feel like the medical community is very good at diagnosing and identifying things that will kill you and addressing them,
Mhm.
but managing it afterwards has been proven to be difficult, it
Mm.
feels like, especially when you're adding in so many different specialties. It's funny because after Wesley's passing, we've talked to several doctors and they're like, and now I consult all the time with this other specialty because of Wesley. Because,
Oh.
like, oh, whenever I have somebody with this situation, I always just go and ask this other specialty what their opinion is, even if they're not
Mm.
currently identified, because we know that Wesley had that,
Oh.
and it's like funny to see that, they fully acknowledge that they don't know everything and that
Yeah.
something that might be a typical side effect that they would see might actually be something completely different when it's paired with other types of conditions together.
Yeah, yeah, and I one thing I've realized too when talking to doctors, especially our pediatricians, I don't know if it's just our luck or if that's how a lot of pediatricians are, but, a lot of reassuring, they're used to having the parents that are anxious, but their kids don't actually have medical issues, but they're afraid they might, and so, a lot of, "Oh, it's okay, that's normal. Oh, it's okay, it's normal," and, "It's probably because of this, or it's probably because of that," and it's like, I'm not here for reassurance. I'm here for answers. So I can go ask my mom or my friend to comfort me if that's what I want, but I want you to dig into this. And I think, cross-checking different specialties definitely is a great way to do that instead of just writing it off as, oh, it's Down syndrome or,
Yeah.
that darn chromosome or whatever they write it off as.
Well, it's funny. One time we he was being really restless, and they were like, "Well, he might need this other medication because usually when he's restless, this can happen." And I was like, "Well, has anyone like looked in his ears to like see if he has an ear infection. Cause like if you were at home and your child was acting restless and they were, a certain age, you'd be like, okay, do they have an ear infection? Are they
Mhm.
getting a tooth? Things like that. And when you're in the hospital world, it's like those things don't get checked.
Yeah.
It's strange because there was one time he was very restless. I had them check his ears because kids with Down syndrome have a history of having ear issues. And they were like, no, his ears are fine. And then, we kind of like wrote it off a little bit. And I was like, well, don't do anything. Let's give him another day. And one of my friends had his godmother had stopped by and she was like, well, I put my finger in his mouth and he bit me like he has a tooth. And I was like, what do you mean he has a tooth?
Oh.
And he was teething. And it's like,
Oh.
in the medical world, though, he's restless. They automatically go to, okay, well, what are all the meds that he's on? What are all the conditions that he have
Mm.
that could be escalated? And
Yeah.
it's like, no, it was just a tooth. He was actually
Oh.
just having like a normal, typical aged issue, but because he has Down syndrome, the teeth come
Mm.
in different order. So they didn't
Oh.
think to look for a molar.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's like, wow. He's a kid too, right? Like, what a shocker. He's actually like, yeah, that is so funny. Wow.
But no one seemed to look for that one.
Oh my goodness. That's maybe when it would be good to have the pediatrician that writes things up. Like,
Right.
hey, then you would know, like, hey, let's check for these things that kids just, experience instead of going straight to the medications or the
Right.
medical
Or assuming
complexities.
that something is wrong
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
doing and making a blood draw out of it and all that.
Well, I think that's cool too. You had that like intuition maybe or to be like, hey, let's wait a day. This doesn't feel like it's anything huge. Like I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, that was a fight. That was part of the taking charge because we had
Mhm.
to create our own action plan for him on when we would do things and when we wouldn't do things.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
awesome. So our last and final point is the the concept of flexible consistency that you held on to during this hospitalization and throughout his life. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so Wesley, he is the kid who allowed me to not be so rigid.
Mm.
He is my reason for, questioning things in life, but he
Mm.
made me realize that I can't plan everything and
Mhm.
that things can be consistent, but that you have to embrace that flexibility within the consistency. So we
Mm.
kind of dubbed this all this time as like our flexible, consistent time,
Mm.
where, with our kids at home, we had to make it known that yes, we were always going to be home for dinner
Mm.
and we were always going to, do the baths and do the bed. But it might happen 2 hours later than it was intended to happen.
Yeah. Oh, man, yeah.
We tried to have things be consistent or one of us always be there for him. But we also had to learn that in the hospital because hospital life, people dropping by all the time. There are some things we were able to be more consistent about. We were able to ask child life, can you put together a schedule for when certain therapies are coming by so they're spaced out? Because
Mm.
what we were finding was PT would come by and then 2 hours later OT would come by and then music therapy would happen to stop by. Like never like consistent, and we couldn't get him on a
Mm.
consistent nap schedule, and with him like he was not having these typical days, um
Mm.
and it was creating other issues within his healthcare because we couldn't track things, because sometimes I had to attribute to, well, he was just really tired because he had just done
Yeah.
all these therapies. So
Yeah.
what we could schedule, we scheduled. And we
Mm.
kind of were okay with then kicking people out if they didn't keep to the schedule. That
Mhm.
PT person that would come by, yes, that was a scheduled time that we wanted you there, but he's just really tired. He's not having a great day and I don't want to push him. And that's
Yeah.
okay. And so being able
Yeah.
to say, come back on Thursday when the next scheduled time is,
Mhm.
that also helped us just in general, being able to say, okay, there are some things that are consistent or that we can plan for,
Mhm.
but we have to be okay that it might get shifted one way or the other, or it
Mhm.
might just look different than it
Yeah.
normally does. One parent might be there instead of two. or my aunt might be tucking you in if we could.
Mhm.
So just this notion of, yes, you can be consistent with also having flexibility. It will save you on energy. It will save you on time by fighting against a schedule while
Mhm.
you're in the hospital, because there is no schedule in the hospital.
Yeah. Well, I think like part of that is probably the fact that you were living in the hospital, right? For that amount of time, like that was where he was living. And so I think just like you would want any other kid to have a routine or a schedule, like
Mhm.
that's kind of mama bear coming out, right? Like, hey, I'm going to protect his days, like his life. This is where he is. And I'm going to make sure he has the reliability of a routine, that you have reliability of a routine and your children do, even if, like you say, it looks different and you have to be flexible. Because I think if, and maybe you even tried this, but I think if you were holding on too tightly to a really rigid routine, that would only add extra stress and maybe guilt and anxiety on an already stressful experience of living in the hospital, really.
Yeah, absolutely 100% felt that way. And that's also kind of why we created the notebook, because it
Mm,
was like the ability to give us, like, to utilize the time when doctors were there to the best of the ability. And then
mhm,
to be able to have other people help fill in for us when we couldn't be there, and
mm,
know that we were going to get the same information from
yeah.
them if they stood in rounds that we would get. That's also kind of gave us that continuity of care.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, because they can go ahead and fill this in and you are there even if you are not there, because your notebook
Mhm.
is there and mama and daddy are there, they're in mind and spirit because you care about all the information that's given. I think that's really awesome because I even just from, I go back to thinking of my son's NICU stay, and I know this is different, but like that pressure to be there for rounds, like that really feels like your time to be a parent and have any kind of role in the medical treatment and care of your child. And
Mhm.
so to have the flexibility to not have to physically be there every time, I think is super awesome. That's so huge. And like you say, you were
Yeah.
working full time. So
Yes.
like,
Yep.
you can only do so much.
Yep.
Well, Erica, I would love to end just with kind of circling back to the notebook that you created and what you hope for a parent listening right now. Maybe someone's listening and they're like, "Man, I could use that notebook for a lot of these unexpected hospital stays." What would be your hope for that parent as they use this?
My hope for any parent or caregiver who would get this in their hand is just that it would help give them peace of mind, that they are thinking through everything and they're asking the right questions and getting the right answers, to give them confidence in not only communicating with those providers, but also giving guidance and structure to be able to make the right decisions for their child when they need to make them. To give
Hmm.
them that confidence that they have all the information in front of them to be able to make a decision that they then can feel confident about.
I love that. I think confidence, like, that can be your saving grace, even when things are really hard or you're really sad or scared or, whatever. I think if you're confident in the path you're going down, I think that really can be a game changer. So I love that is kind of the underlying reason of this notebook, is to give parents that confidence so that no matter what we're going through or experiencing with our child, we can at least have that peace that we're doing the best we can for our child and we're not missing anything that needs to be seen. And I just think that's really awesome. So thank you so much, Erica, for sharing so much wisdom from your many days in the hospital with Wesley. And I just think you're awesome.
I think you're just as awesome. Thank you for having a platform that not only I can glean information from, but that can just provide so much hope and encouragement for other families in similar circumstances.
You're welcome. Thank you. Check out the links in the show notes to order your own notebook for yourself or to gift to someone who could benefit from it. If you want another episode kind of in the medical advocacy realm, check out episode 58 with Tamika Diaz if you haven't already. There is a link in the show notes for that. I will also put a link in there for episode 9, a solo episode I created way back in season 1, all about taking charge of your therapy team. It's an oldie but a goodie. Join me next week as I chat with Gina Polamoney, both professional and parent, as we chat about financial resources and tips for navigating that minefield. It's a really important topic, and I'm really excited to share that one with you. Don't miss it. See you then.